Welcome to Ideas on Tap, presented by the Museum of Natural and Cultural History. I'm Lauren, and I'd like to start this evening by recognizing that the museum and the University of Oregon are located on Kalapuya Ilihi, the traditional homeland of the Kalapuya people, many of whom are now citizens of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde and the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians. We recognize and honor all Indigenous people who continue to call the Willamette Valley home. If you've been joining us since we went virtual for Ideas on Tap, then you may have noticed my change of scenery here. You're getting a tiny little sneak peek of our newest exhibit, Magic in Medieval Europe. For the full magical experience, members are invited to join us for a special members-only preview on Friday, October 22nd. And the exhibit will open to the public starting on Saturday, October 23rd. If you're not yet a member, or if you've let your membership lapse, please visit our website and join today. Although we might not be together in person, we do still want to hear your questions and your comments. During this evening's program, you can use the Q&A or chat features on Zoom and Facebook to reflect on the talk or add your thoughts, to engage with other viewers, and to ask questions of our speaker. I'll be collecting your questions across both platforms, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end. During the talk, we will also post a link to a brief survey in the comments on both Zoom and Facebook. Please consider taking a minute or two to fill it out, even if you've already filled it out before. Not only will your feedback help us improve future virtual programs, you'll be entered to win a $25 gift card to Viking Braga Company. For those of you new to Ideas on Tap, the museum hosted this program at Viking Braga's Southtown location prior to the pandemic, and I am sure looking forward to the day when we can meet there again. If you enjoyed tonight's program, we're asking that you please consider making a secure, tax-deductible donation of $5 to $10 at the web address listed on the screen to help keep programs like this one accessible to all. That's giving.uoregon.edu/MNCHgift. Your donation directly supports the museum's educational programming, bringing science and culture adventures to Oregonians of every age and in every corner of the state. Thank you. Finally, I hope that you'll tune in next month for another Ideas on Tap. On Wednesday, November 3rd, I'll be joined by Chris Newell, citizen of the Passamaquoddy tribe at Indian Township and author of Scholastic's new publication, If You Lived During the Plymouth Thanksgiving. Chris will share a more balanced retelling of the history and aftermath of the 1621 landing of the Mayflower and the Plymouth Thanksgiving. Hope to see you there. And now it's my pleasure to introduce this evening's speaker, Dr. Martha Bayless. Martha is a professor of English and director of the Folklore and Public Culture at the University of Oregon, as well as curator for our new exhibit, Magic in Medieval Europe. Martha's teaching and research interests include medieval magic, food, games, and popular culture. She is author of books such as Parody in the Middle Ages and Sin and Filth in Medieval Culture, The Devil in the Latrine. She joins us this evening to explore the surprising history of medieval magic, including the origins of our modern Halloween traditions. Welcome, Martha.
Now, the main challenge of this is to get the share screen function to work. So I'm going to try this, and if it doesn't work, somebody let me know. Okay, so I'm going to assume, since I'm not hearing anything, that you all can see this full screen slide.
It looks good.
Thanks. So welcome and thanks for coming. I'm going to talk today about medieval magic and what people tried to do with it and how it helped them explain the world, and some things about witches and Halloween because it's October and it's that time of the year. So most people, I think, when they think of medieval magic, they think of something like this book. They think of a person bent over a book, trying to concoct a potion or make a spell, and they have a wand, and they try to have a little performance or a ritual and make something happen. And there were people in the Middle Ages who did that. They were mostly clergymen, actually. Here are some pictures of them doing that. On the left, you see a clergyman, and he's trying to conjure the devil. That's what they tried to do, because devils were powerful. And, you know, it's in a circle there. The idea is to keep the devil in the circle and control him. But of course, every time they tried to do that, it went wrong. So the story said. So you see over on the right, the devil is actually now controlling the man. So that was not an advised way to do it. And actually, it was not very much practiced in actuality. For one thing, you needed a book, and you needed to know how to read it. And most people did not have a book, and they did not know how to read it. I always think here of the Tony Curtis movie, The Sword of the Valiant. I don't know if anybody has seen that movie, but it's the one where he retains a Brooklyn accent, and he says, "Yonder is the castle of my father." But anyway, he goes into a library and he says, I know you're amazed at the number of books. We have 6. So if you wanted to do book magic, you needed to own books, and most people didn't. So this was actually not the kind of magic that people performed in the Middle Ages. The kind they performed was everyday magic in everyday life, in humble little cottages, not the kind that required long memorized spells or anything, but just the kind of thing that you did along the way in the course of your day. But before I get onto that more, let me talk about what magic is. The word magic derives from a term meaning the art of the magus. And a magus is a person who knows the secrets of harnessing supernatural powers. In medieval England, they were the people who especially knew those things were called cunning folk, cunning men or cunning women, or wise men. And we actually know this term, of course, because the plural of magus is magi, and the magi are the 3 wise men. They're not the 3 like really smart men who understood psychology. They're the 3 magicians. And over on the right, you can see them visiting the infant Jesus. And the idea is that they knew about the infant Jesus because they could read the stars, and they knew that the Messiah had arrived. And so they were kind of a sign that the real Messiah had come. So they were not the 3 smart men, they were the 3 magicians. So if we move on to the uses of magic, why did people use it? They used it to try to control the uncontrollable parts of life. It was a tool in the medieval toolbox. And so if you think about how you do things, think about what parts of life are hard to control. For instance, when you mow the lawn, why do you not use magic? And I think the answer is obvious: because you have a lawnmower. You may even have a more advanced lawnmower than this one. And so the things that are obvious, you can just do without magic. You don't need it. So washing your clothes, you don't need magic. Mowing the lawn, you don't need magic. Making coffee, you don't need magic. What you need magic for are the things that don't have a clear and easy way to do what you want to do. So the parts of life that are hard to control are the parts of life that attract magic. For instance, health, weather, love, obviously, very hard to control, safety, whether the crops grow, games of chance, predicting the future. All of those things are hard to do. All of them will attract magic. And so they did. Health, you had 1 bazillion spells and formulas for protection and healing. Weather, you had magic to bring rain, magic to calm storms. Love, magic to bring love, or to stop people straying. If they did stray, there was magic to make men impotent so that they were unsuccessful at straying. Anyway, lots of different ways to try to control your love life. Safety, anytime you went on a trip, you probably indulged in a little magic. Crops, there's magic for field fertility, magic to suppress mice and rats and field pests. Games of chance, obviously you want to increase your luck in those. And predicting the future, there's divination. So all of those things that are hard to control were surrounded by magical practices. And here's some examples of actual magic that are found in medieval manuscripts, and they show the range of things that you might use magic for. So to get rid of mice, to stop bleeding, to cure toothache. I mean, we could really use some magic for that even now. To prevent thieves, to cure baldness, which I think many of the so-called cures are still magic. To kill flies, to make a horse stand still while you bridle him. And that's probably not used so much anymore, but if you've tried to make a horse stand still, some magic would be helpful in that. So you see, even very trivial things had magical practices to solve them. And then other things too, to choose the best pig, which is important if you're buying a pig and that's your only livestock, to have an abundance of bees, to make it appear to someone that there is a river in the house, to make a dead person sing. Those last ones are a little peculiar. I think probably somebody's showing off there and saying, oh, I have a spell to make a river in your house. And they might even say, if you give me 12 shillings, I'll give you the spell to make a river appear in your house and you can impress all your friends. The guy gives him 12 shillings and then, a river does not appear, because there were also lots of charlatans who pretended that they could do magical things, but they actually couldn't. It was a big kind of source of scams as well. You would go to somebody who could, guarantee you an abundance of bees or something, and they would be hiding behind a wall and listen through a hole. And you would say to the wife, well, I'm here because I need more bees. Then the person would go out and kind of conspicuously walk down the street as if they just arrived and say, by my magical powers, I know that you need more bees in your life. You'd say, oh, you must be magical. So I suspect that these last things are involved in some kind of scam like that. But you can see that there was a wide range of reasons that you might use magic. In fact, there were magical practices for every single occasion, and you can see a list of them there. Everything that happened in life had a magical practice attached to it. And over on the right, you see a farmyard with a woman milking a cow. That had a lot of magic attached to it because it was very important for the household that the cow is healthy, the cow gives enough milk, the milk can be turned into butter. I should say in that picture, there are chickens in the middle. Ignore those chickens. Those chickens are very rude. So let's just move on from the chickens. So there was a system to all of this. I think a lot of these things are intuitive. Right is good, left is bad. You can tell this by the vocabulary, in Latin. Left is sinister. I mean, that's the word for left, and everything right, dexterous. Clockwise is good, counterclockwise is bad. That's the way the world works because most people are right-handed, so that feels like the natural hand. Clockwise is the way the sun moves, so that feels natural. Counterclockwise is the way that if you're grinding your grain and you want to actually magically kill your husband, you grind it counterclockwise. The numbers 3, 7, and 9 are magical. And then lots of different things about your life might be magical. For instance, salt is magical because it magically preserves food. Like, why is that? We can't understand it. It must be magical. Therefore, when you spill salt, that must be bad because you're doing something bad to a magical substance. Also, if you think like, what would make you do something bad like spilling salt? Well, maybe demonic forces would do it, but salt can prevail against demonic forces. So demonic forces, where are they in your life? They're to your left, right? So you throw salt over your shoulder to counteract the demonic forces with the magic preserving thing. So it all kind of makes sense. And there are laws, not that the medieval people called them these things. Anthropologists have devised these laws, but magical practices tend to follow these laws. For instance, the law of similarity. If two things are similar, one affects the other. So over there on the right, you have a mandrake, which is a kind of plant, which looks very much like a person. It doesn't look quite as much like a person as this picture does, but because it seemed to look like a person, people thought that what you did to a mandrake could affect your own health. So if you wanted to increase your fertility, you put mandrakes under your bed. And the trouble with mandrakes is they were obviously magical, and therefore they didn't want you to do things to them. They were sentient like people because they were shaped like people. So you had to gather them in a very dangerous way. Over on the left, you see a mandrake, just the sort of head and torso of the mandrake are poking out of the ground. And there's a man who wants to pick the mandrake, but what you do is you get your dog and you attach the dog's leash to the mandrake, and then you run very far away and you call the dog, and then the dog, in running towards you, pulls the mandrake out of the ground, because the trouble is that the mandrake screams when you pull it out of the ground, and because the mandrake is magical, the scream will kill you. So you have to make sure not to hear the scream. Over on the right is the same thing, except the mandrakes are planted the other way around. They apparently did not decide which way mandrakes grew. And there's a real mandrake. So you can see why people associated it with the human body. And our exhibit at the museum will have a mandrake. So I've been assured it's a non-screaming mandrake. So you can get, within range of it, I think, but don't take any liberties. Another example is witch bottles. Witch bottles are post-medieval, but they're very interesting. They were a tradition for about at least 300 years, maybe 400. And they're bottles that counteract witches. And here are two genuine witch bottles. They have creepy stuff in them. Here's a list of things that are in the witch bottle. Sharp things: fish hooks, pins, nails, thorns, shards of glass, human teeth, fingernail clippings, and urine. So they're post-medieval and they're creepy, but they follow the law of similarity, because there's two theories as to how the witch bottles work. One is that you, the person who's trying to counteract witches, you pee in the witch bottle, and the urine in the witch bottle makes it into the equivalent of the witch's bladder. And then you put the sharp things in, and then the witch feels sharp things in her bladder, and she's too disabled to attack you anymore. So that follows the law of similarity. The bottle is like a bladder. The other theory is that urine is bad, witches are bad. Therefore, urine is attractive to witches. Therefore, if you put urine in your witch bottle, the witch will be attracted and will fly into the bottle, and then you can stopper the bottle up and then keep the witch contained. So you bury the bottle under the hearth of your house, because witches come in the chimney, right? How else are they going to get in? It's not just Santa that comes in the chimney. And so witches come in the chimney, but they encounter the witch bottle, they fly into it, and then they're stuck there, and then they can't harm you. So that's the idea of how witch bottles are supposed to protect you. And the witch bottles that they find often have a note in them that says, "Do not open this bottle." And the Museum of London right now is doing a big project on witch bottles. And they opened one live on Facebook last May, which was, very suspenseful. But of course, I was saying it's like watching The Curse of the Mummy's Tomb, right? Like, don't open the bottle. Oh no, So the Museum of London is undergoing funding difficulties, and I have to say, they opened a witch bottle. So anyway, that's an illustration of the law of similarity. Another law is the law of contagion, which basically, when you sum it up, is once in contact, always in contact. So the ruby slippers have been in contact with Dorothy or Judy Garland in The Wizard of Oz. And because of that, they will always be special. They always have an extra dimension to them. And so if you need some magical protection, you take something that has been in contact with something powerful. And the keys of the church are a great example of that. The church is obviously very powerful, a powerful force for good, speaking in medieval terms. And the keys are something detachable from the church that you can take with you and then use that church's power for yourself. So, and keys are especially powerful because they're iron, and iron is uh, malleable in a way you can't really understand. Sometimes it's liquid and sometimes it's solid. And so an iron thing associated with the church is going to be much more holy than like a rock from the church or something like that. So that's using the power of contagion. Contagion doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It just means that it transmits power. So that's the first use of magic, is to try to control the uncontrollable parts of life by applying these laws. The second use is to explain things that are hard to explain, because we know that invisible forces rule the world. Like, why do things happen? It's so random. It's not clear to us. They thought the invisible forces were magic forces. So if we think about what things are hard to explain, the causes of misfortune are hard to explain. So if your cow stopped giving milk, why did it do that? The answer may well be buttercats. Buttercats are magical cats that come and they drink from your cow. And so when you go to milk the cow, there's no milk to give. The buttercat has stolen it, and then it takes it down to its ally or associate down the road and then spits it up into the bucket, and you have cat barfed milk. But anyway, it's, I guess, easier than owning a cow. So if your milk dries up, you think it's probably buttercats that did it, because otherwise, what is it? You don't understand why it would happen. Or why did your cow die? It may well be hobgoblins. I have to confess, this is not a picture of a hobgoblin. It's a picture of a devil, but they were very closely related. And hobgoblins took offense at all kinds of things. They were nasty, mischievous little supernatural beings, and they might well kill your cow because they were mad that day. Or the man next door might die. And why did he die? Invisible forces make people die suddenly. Well, it may well be that he was attacked by elves. So elves are the source of a lot of misfortune, or the attribution of misfortune in the Middle Ages. And I should just say that elves and fairies are exactly the same thing. We don't think that now because we think elves wear green and have pointy ears, but fairies wear pink and have wings. But actually, all through the Middle Ages in England, they were called elves, even the things that we would think of as fairies now. Fairies is a newfangled term to describe those. So elves and fairies are the same thing, and they might just kill you because they're very capricious. Or what happens when you're paralyzed when you're asleep? And I think over half of people have had this experience where you wake up and you're sort of awake, but you can't move. And what this is actually is sleep paralysis, which is a physiological problem when your sleeping system and your waking system get mixed up. But it feels like something is sitting on your chest. You feel a sort of oppression because you can't take a full breath. And so they interpreted that as the nightmare. The mare is an evil being, an evil supernatural being. It's not related to a horse, but later on the words confused people and they sort of got horses into the picture. But anyway, the nightmare comes and he sits on you, and sometimes he rides you. He takes you up in the skies and he rides you as if you're a flying horse and takes you places. And so if you have weird dreams, it might be because the nightmare has taken you someplace. This was a popular subject for illustration, and you can see it there. No wonder the woman's having trouble, because she's sleeping in a very uncomfortable position. And there's another one. He did a lot of pictures of this because they were very popular. You can see the horse theme in this a little more clearly. Again, she's sleeping in an uncomfortable position. This actually gave rise to a passage in Frankenstein, the novel Frankenstein. And we first hear about this in the 900s when there's a spell to counteract the demon that's sitting on you. And it survived as a genuine belief in the modern times. My friend Kate Wilhelm, the author who lived in Eugene, her mother belonged to a church in Kentucky that excommunicated one member because she was accused of witch riding. In other words, riding the person in this magical way. She was accused by another person of witch riding, and the accuser said she rode me like a mule. And so they threw this woman out of the church. I think we can always rely on Kentucky to preserve things like that. So it's a very long-lived tradition, and it was explained not by physiology, but by recourse to magical beings. So other things that are hard to explain is the origins of strange or mysterious or wondrous objects. For instance, if you come across a rock-hard bun-like object, what in the heck is that? It's obviously not just a rock, but what is it? So they interpret it as fairy bread, fairy loaves. They're actually fossil sea urchins, but I mean, the Middle Ages is not going to think of that explanation. And so again, the law of similarity applied. When you found a fairy loaf, you felt very special and you put it on your mantelpiece, and then it was supposed to attract more bread. And so you would never be without bread if you had a fairy loaf in your house. Or sometimes people thought that they were thunderstones. In other words, you know, rain sometimes produces hail, and they would find these round, hard objects, and they thought, well, they might also be produced by storms. And so they were produced by thunder, they thought, and thunder and lightning would produce these stones. And the idea was that thunder wanted to strike places, but if there was a stone there, it would know that it already put lightning down on that place. And so it would prevent it from happening again. So here's a church that has thunderstones, in other words, fossils, around the window to keep the church from being struck by lightning. Now, what if you find weird slime in the forest? Clearly, it's magical troll cat vomit because it doesn't look like any kind of normal thing. And we know that magical troll cats live in the forest, which are big magical cats. It's actually a slime mold, but it actually does seem more intuitive that it would be magical troll cat vomit. So that was a way of explaining something that looked peculiar in the woods. Or weird stones that you find in the stomachs of animals. These are actually called bezoars, and they're kind of like pearls in an oyster. They're foreign matter that's gotten in the stomach somehow, and sometimes they're like stones, and sometimes they're sort of mass of stringy things or something. And they thought, well, that's obviously magical because that doesn't seem normal at all. And they thought that it cured poison, so they were very valuable. But also they turn into butter cats. So you can't leave one unattended, and you need to watch it because it will turn into a butter cat and then go rob your cow of milk. So, you know, it's all connected in there. Or stones with holes in them. Those are called hagstones, and they're obviously not normal. So the idea is that they're portals to the fairy world. And if you look through the hole, you can see the fairy world. And then fairies or malevolent beings can come through the hole. So if you own the hagstone, you can prevent them from coming through and thereby assure luck for yourself. So people carried around hagstones or put them on their houses or things. Here's one from the Museum of Witchcraft and Magic in England. And this is doubly powerful because it's a hagstone attached to an iron key. So you've got every kind of protective magic going on there. And so it's about how things are interpreted to be magic when they just look a little peculiar. Hagstones had a lot of legends about them, a lot of currency. Here's a long thing, which is too long for you to read, but it's about a whole family that had protective hagstones attached to keys. One of them had 3 keys in a hagstone, another had 7 keys in a hagstone, another had 9 keys in a hagstone. So now you know if you find a hagstone, what you can do with it. And what about fairy cups? If you have a wondrous goblet, the explanation must be it comes from the fairies. So the medieval chronicler William of Newborough tells the story of a man who was wandering through the countryside. He finds a magic mound and it has a door in it. So of course he goes in the door, and there he finds the fairies having a banquet, which they apparently do 24/7. And they offer him a cup with wine in it, but he knows better than to drink it, because if you drink or eat in the fairy world, then you have to stay there forever. So he pours out the wine and he runs away with the cup, and they chase him, but he makes his escape. And then he offers the cup to Henry I, who then offers it as an honorable thing to David, King of Scotland, who keeps it among his treasures, and then it goes down through kings and ends up with Henry II. So what this was is that Henry II actually had an amazing goblet, and this backstory was created to explain it because you thought, well, a person can't make that kind of goblet. It's too amazing. It must be a fairy goblet. This goblet on the right is not that actual goblet. That goblet has disappeared, but it's the kind of goblet that would have been called a fairy goblet. So on the whole, people would say, I've been harmed by a mysterious force. Who's to blame for this? The medieval explanation is the fairies did it, or the elves did it. The early modern explanation is the witches did it. So let's think about witches in the last section of this. There's a classic witch. Some basics about witches. What did they ride? Brooms, obviously, but also a lot of other things. Sticks, pitchforks, milk sieves, goats, and people. In that middle picture there, you see there's the first witch is on a broom, but then you've got a devil on a broom because he flies around with the witches. And then you've got a male witch. I guess he's on a broom, but a male witch is an interesting, variant. And then on the right, you have three witches. They've turned themselves into animals and they're riding a pitchfork. You couldn't just choose any stick or pitchfork or something. You had to have a magic ointment, but then you could, those things were all things you had around the house. Here's some more witches. On the top left, you see a witch riding a normal broom, but below her is just a witch riding a stick. So you don't need the sweeping part. I guess now it's vacuum cleaners that you would be riding, especially the stick vacuum cleaners. On the right, you see an early modern picture of a lot of witches. Over on the right-hand side of that, you have a man on a broom, male witch. On the left, you have a female witch. I do not know what the heck she is riding. Maybe somebody can figure it out and suggest it after the talk, because that's very peculiar. So there's another category of something they were riding. So where did they fly to? They flew to gatherings where they kissed the hind end of the devil. Obviously, there they all are in this picture. You can see some up in the air flying around, and then some have landed, and there are their brooms. They're both men and women there. And there's the devil in goat form, because goats are very lusty. So that's the kind of animal that the devil becomes. And he's helpfully raised his tail so they can all kiss his hind end. The hind end, of course, is the evil end. And sometimes there are pictures of him kissing, they're kissing the actual, devil in devil form, but a lot of the time they're kissing a goat. I'm not sure that that's really the most attractive thing to do if you were flying around on a broom. It seems like there's all kinds of fun you could get up to that would be more fun than kissing the hind end of a goat, but who am I to say? So 4 surprising facts about witches. They were not actually very medieval. They had medieval people who tried to do magic, sometimes harmful magic, but they didn't think of them as a concept of witches in the same way that we think of, with the pointy hats and the stirring the cauldron and all of that kind of thing. Witches were kind of a confabulation of the 1400s, when people, especially a lot of misogynist clerical people, wanted someone to blame for something. And through a sort of constellation of events, they decided that witches were the thing to blame, especially in the 1480s, when this book, A Hammer for Witches, came out, which was written by a very peculiar monomaniacal guy named Heinrich Kramer. And so he kind of alerted people to this moral panic about witches. And incidentally, we have a copy of that book, which will be in the exhibit, which is very exciting. Also, most of those prosecuted for witchcraft were just regular people. They were not professional, full-time cunning folk or witches. They were just people down the road who happened to have somebody with a grudge against them. 25% of them were men. And most of the prosecutions took place in Switzerland and Germany. And not that the whole thing wasn't terrible, but they actually were a little more reasonable than you might think, because a lot of communities, something bad would happen, like the plague would come, and they would say, oh, what's the cause of the plague? We don't understand it. And somebody had a copy of the Hammer for Witches and said, it's witches. Here, I have a book, it proves it, it's witches. So they would look around and try to find somebody to condemn as a witch, and they would find some poor soul and execute that person. Sometimes they didn't even do that. They just punish them or something, but sometimes they execute them. And then the plague would continue. And they would say, well, actually, that might not be the reason that we have the plague. And so they would stop, and they would never persecute a witch again. Most communities only executed one witch. So that's kind of reassuring in the middle of a lot of unpleasant things that were happening. But here are the two most important facts about witches. They've been said to be either evil Satan worshiping crones who caused harm, that's the late medieval view, or secret pagans who preserved ancient ways, especially nature-loving secret pagans, that's the modern view. They were not actually either of these things. In fact, they did not exist. What I mean by that is that the idea of witches did not correspond to anybody in real life. There were not people who gathered in covens to worship Satan and to boil babies and to make potions with eye of newt and toe of frog. All of that was just moral panic. It was completely made up. There were people who did various kinds of magic and they were persecuted for it, but they were not what anybody thought of as witches, qua witches. And you may say, but what about Halloween? It's a satanic holiday, and witches have been, doing their thing on Halloween all these centuries. So let's do quickly a little backstory about Halloween. The truth is that since the Middle Ages, Halloween has been a magical holiday, but not a pagan or satanic holiday. It's a Christian magical holiday. And it's the combination of two Christian holy days, All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day. All Saints' Day is on November 1st. All Souls' Day is on November 2nd. So people got them kind of confused and they mixed them up a lot. Saints are also called Hallows, like, hallowed be thy name. All Hallows' Day became Halloween, the evening of All Hallows' Day. So it's derived from two Christian holy days. And the most powerful part of Christianity, as the Middle Ages viewed it, was the Eucharist, because the Eucharist was, Christ on earth. And so people tried to steal the Eucharist for all kinds of reasons, to cure fevers, to cure horses, to fertilize the fields, to make love potions. In fact, I've been assured by a modern minister that people still try to steal the Eucharist. So the church was very upset about this, and they wanted the Eucharist used only for holy purposes, not to make love potions. So they kept very strict controls over the Eucharist. So what people did was they made homemade versions of the Eucharist, homemade little round wafers with a cross in them, which through the law of similarity, they hoped would have a very similar effect to the Eucharist. And they also worried about their dead loved ones. They were assured that they were in the afterlife, but they thought, are they in heaven, or could they be in hell? Are they suffering? Do they need help? Can we help them? And those feelings especially came to a head in around All Souls' Day, which is the day to commemorate the dead. So they wanted to use the most powerful magic that they could, which was their homemade Eucharists. So they developed a tradition of going door to door on All Souls' Eve or All Saints' Eve, begging for these little homemade Eucharists, which they called soul cakes. And every soul cake was supposed to save a soul from hell. So that's how you could help your loved ones, is by going through this ritual of going from door to door. And you would say a little thing and the person would give you soul cakes. And this tradition is still alive in many parts of Europe. And another variant of it is grandparents give it to grandchildren. And I had a student a couple of years ago, and he said, oh, I wondered what those were because my grandparents sent me those little round things. And I didn't know what they were. And I said, that doesn't sound American. Where are your grandparents from? And he said, well, they live in Germany. And I said, the German soul cake tradition. And he said, I always wondered why they had plus signs in the middle, because he didn't understand that's supposed to be the cross. So he thought it was a plus sign. So now he knows. Anyway, as happens with almost all bread items, over time, people think, well, let's make it sweeter. Let's add some fruit to it. Let's just make it kind of like candy. And so it basically, soul cakes evolved into candy. The tradition migrated to the US in the early 20th century, and it became trick-or-treating. So trick-or-treating started as a magic ritual to save souls. So that's part of what made up modern Halloween. It's obviously nothing to do with worshiping Satan, nothing to do with druids or non-Christian magical rituals. It's just the evolution of a Christian kind of magical holiday. But you may say, what about the costumes? Well, this is a day dedicated, and the witches, obviously, yes. Where do the witches come in? It's a day dedicated to the dead. And so people are going to dress up as ghosts. The practice of dressing up and going door to door is a characteristic of a lot of occasions in British tradition. And so it just sort of migrated onto Halloween. People like going door to door, dressing up. Sometimes the thing is, can you guess who I am? So people would dress up as ghosts because it's a holiday dedicated to the dead. And then they would also dress up as skeletons because it's a holiday dedicated to the dead. And then they would dress up as anything scary. And witches are a scary thing. So dressing up as witches came in the 1910s and 1920s. There was a big fad for dressing up as witches on Halloween. And then it, evolved in all sorts of directions. Everything scary, anything at all, sexy Halloween. We're going sort of 12 different ways with Halloween now. But that's how witches got into the mix. Historically, witches have no association with Halloween. So it's always been about Christian supernatural power against the forces of death and darkness. It's never been about witches or Satan or anything like that. So to conclude, I hope you've seen some of the ways in which medieval people used magic and some of the ways in which that's carried on to modern uses of magic. So in trick-or-treating, in throwing salt over your shoulder, in other traditions that we haven't talked about, throwing coins in fountains or lucky rabbit's feet, things like that. And all of those are covered in the magic exhibit, which I hope you'll be able to go and see, because there's lots more things to recognize about the connections between medieval magic and modern practices. So I would like to thank the museum and you for coming to this, and also finally to warn you to be careful around mandrakes. Thank you. I'm going to stop. Sharing.
Thank you so much, Martha. That was great. And thanks to everyone who's been adding comments to the chat or questions in the Q&A. We have had a lot of comments come in over the chat. So if there is something that you really want to ask Martha, if you could drop it into the Q&A, that would help me a lot, so that I'm not trying to look through all of that while we go through the questions, but we'll go ahead and jump right in. And we had someone ask towards the very beginning of your talk, whether you need to placate invisible forces like hobgoblins and elves, or do we just try to scare them off somehow?
Oh, I think you better placate them. You can't scare them off because they're way too powerful for that. And the trouble is they sometimes take offense at things you can't predict. Like there's a tradition of local house spirits who they take offense if you offer them clothes, but there's another tradition that they take offense if you don't offer them clothes. So it's kind of a crapshoot, which kind you have in your house. I guess you could just start by offering them like one shoe and see how it goes. But yeah, you better placate them. Or, well, the other thing is, if you have a religious item like a key or the Eucharist or something like that, you can frighten them off that way. That definitely will work. But frequently you don't have that on you. And so it's like vampires, right? You have the cross and you ward them off, but sometimes you're caught without that, and you just have to keep on living with them because they're all around all the time. The other trick about vampires, I'll just mention in case anybody runs into one, is vampires are a little bit compulsive. And so if one's running after you, you spread grain, you throw grain on the ground, and they're compelled to stop and count the grain, and then that slows them down and you can escape. So it's actually easy. I don't know why they don't do that in the movies.
Yeah, I have not heard that. That's so fascinating and seems like an easy way to outwit a vampire. Guess it
So I'm seeing some questions go by. Some people want to know about the Celtic tradition of Samhain, which is sort of famous for being an origin of Halloween. That's a complicated question. That was actually a fair. It sort of a harvest fair. It was not a time when they practiced magical rites. They did have a tradition that on that night and on some other nights, just in Ireland and the Irish Celtic regions, not in Wales, that on All Souls Eve, people or dead people or supernatural people could come over from the other side. The tricky thing about that is that our sources for that come after the invention of All Souls Day, when it was thought that you could reach through to the other side. And for instance, they rang church bells on All Souls Eve so that the dead could hear it and be comforted. And when the Protestant Reformation came and they tried to eliminate that, and they said, that's a Catholic custom, we're going to eliminate those church bells, people rebelled. I mean, they rioted because they said, our dead loved ones are in the afterlife and they need to hear the bells to know that they're remembered. So in other words, what I'm saying is, people always assume that things start out pagan and become Christian, and Christians borrow from paganism, but sometimes secular traditions borrow from religious traditions. And it may well be that the tradition that souls come through on Samhain is borrowed from the Christian All Souls Eve instead of the other way around. So that's what the sources suggest. So that's a complication that people often don't take into account. Anyway, I've gone on too long about that one. There's like 1 bazillion comments. Oh my goodness.
There are a lot. I have the Q&A open. I can ask a couple from there. Someone is asking for clarification about whether people killed a lot of cats in the Middle Ages because of their association with witches, or whether that's just a myth.
I can't say that it didn't happen, but I don't think it happened an extraordinary amount. I'm afraid what they usually killed cats for is because they used their skins. I mean, cats were useful because they protect your grain and stuff. So you don't want to kill a useful thing. They did, not in the Middle Ages, but in the early modern period, which is the evil period, they did get on a tear about people's familiars. And now we think of familiars being a sort of, animal that's in connection with you and does your bidding and is like a little devil or something. We think of them as being cats, but very frequently they were not cats. There were dog familiars, goat familiars, sheep familiars, fly familiars, lizard familiars, and my favorite, the snail familiars, which did the snails make it into the exhibit?
The snails did make it into the exhibit. So they'll be featured in our 3-dimensional house that people can check out. And we also have a take on a Plinko board where you can test fate and see what familiar is assigned to you. So
Well,
maybe, maybe someone will get a snail who comes to
my,
visit the exhibit.
my favorite familiars are this man named John Bysack in 1645. He had 6 familiars, and this is really true. I mean, it's a deposition from him. At least he thought this was true. His 6 snails did his bidding, and he had names for all of them. Pikar was one of them, and then Jeffrey, the evil snail. And each killed a separate kind of thing. Like one snail killed cows, one snail killed sheep, and one snail killed Christians. And what I want to know is, how did they do that? Like, how does a snail catch up with a cow? I guess it transforms itself into another form, because that's the thing about familiars, is they can transform themselves. But I don't know. I mean, I try to be respectful towards people's beliefs, but it's just hilarious, the snail familiars. So we really wanted the snail familiars to be in the exhibit.
They catch up with magic, Martha. Everything's magic. So someone is asking that they recently read that you need to have a rosary and a piece of bread in your pocket to protect yourself from the fairies. And that this was something that they heard related to Newfoundland. Does the bread relate to the Eucharist, or is this a different tradition?
The bread must relate to that. I don't know of any magical bread that's not related to the Eucharist. I mean, there are kinds of bread that you do things to make more bread, but they're not protective against the fairies. I mean, that sounds like a fascinating tradition. So it'd be great to learn more about that. There was a tradition of putting bread in the field when you're about to plow the field or plant the seed, and you'd put bread in there just to kind of give the field the idea, and the law of similarity would attract more bread. And I said to one of my classes that this happened as recently as 1924, but then somebody in the class had worked in a farm on the South when they did that. So that one's still alive too. So I thought that was fascinating. Oh, some people are getting prosecuted for witchcraft in the comments. And somebody says it's a butterfly net that the witch is riding. I guess you could, I don't know.
About what it might be. Someone suggested I saw a rug beater, or some sort of sieve. Yeah, but then there were some entertaining ones as well. Let's see here. So, here's something related to Halloween since it's coming up. Where did the pumpkin come from? Why pumpkins?
Yeah, I mean, the pumpkins are turnips originally, because you don't have pumpkins in Britain. And I have to say, having spent Halloween in Britain, turnips are really hard to carve. It's like carving a carrot. It's completely pointless. They don't have Halloween the way we do. It's been re-imported from us. Halloween is a combination of Irish traditions of sort of making merry on that night, and British traditions of soul cakes and things like that. So they meet in the US and develop into Halloween, and everything like pumpkins has been re-imported into Britain now, and they don't quite know what to do with it, and they're a little suspicious. But they have numbers of traditions of carrying these lanterns made out of turnips or whatever, and various legends associated with them of sort of frightening magical beings that live in marshes or things like that. And so you're kind of counteracting the frightening magical being by having your own frightening face. And so it just comes in with a general theme of, let's think of things that are frightening and then just do a lot of them.
All right.
Lots of people have hagstones, it looks like.
Yes, and someone was asking for clarification about whether the hagstones had to have that hole naturally, or if people drilled their own hagstones.
Oh, I don't think it works if you drill your own hagstone.
Seems like
No, that is totally cheating, and probably something will come through it and punish you. So, oh no, oh. Somebody says it's a popcorn popper, tennis racket that she's flying on.
I hear this was very popular. We've had someone going back to the very beginning of your talk, when you were mentioning thunderstones. Is there a relation between thunderstones and the Norse god Thor?
Not that I'm aware of, no. I mean, that there are legends develop around thunder because, you know, it's inexplicable. So it must be magical in some way. And so there are things about thunder and Thor, but I don't think that any of them involve stones. I mean, they considered that natural history, really, that thunder produced stones and they were all over the countryside. And, you know, it's just sort of magical leavings of something. It doesn't involve a person.
So were the witches in Shakespeare's Macbeth reflective of the view of witches at the time, or did he expand upon the idea in his play?
Yeah, that's how they thought of witches at the time.
All right.
Yeah, we're into the period already where people have this thing of they gather together and they do evil. And, you know, I mean, he's kind of using it in a, you know, a contrived way, but that would be how people did think of witches at the time. The witch legend develops really quickly once they get onto it. There's a lot of concern about fake hagstones in the chat. That I didn't realize there's a whole scam thing going with selling hagstones. Who knew?
Who knew? So many things new tonight to learn. And now there's a discussion about worms, which could be a familiar.
That's right. That's why, yes, they're evil worms. Well, worms, I mean, they're on the side of the devil anyway, because when you want to rid your field of pests, you do things involving holy water and saints, because things like flies and, you know, insects that eat the crops are on the side of the devil and they're sent by the devil. There's nothing sort of neutral about the inexplicable things. So you counteract it with the holy things. So it makes total sense that worms would be involved in making hagstones, and worms would be on the side of the devil, or the, you know, the fairy world or something like that. Yeah,
so we have someone in the Q&A asking for clarification about whether medieval people believed that their spells or magic behavior were kind of at the directive of a higher power, gods or goddesses, and whether they wanted them to do their bidding.
I'm not quite sure what that means. I mean, they thought that, well, a lot of people just thought that there were things that were magical that didn't have to do with any religious feeling. There were just things that were like, what's an example? I mean, you can have a ring that had a magical effect because it has a magical jewel in it. And there's no fairy or god or something that's made it that way. It just is magical. And then when Christianity tried to take over magic, as the centuries progressed, Christianity kept saying, no supernatural power is authentic without us. If it's not from us, it's from the devil, and that's bad. So they tried to say there's no neutral magic. And as that happened, people said, oh, I see. So Christianity is where we should go for all the magic. And then they started using more and more Christian things, not in a way the church approved of, you know. But so early on, you might think, well, my crops failed. Why did they fail? Maybe because, you know, the person next door put a spell on them and she hates me or something. Maybe it's because I offended a fairy. Maybe it's because somebody threw a magic something stone in there and that ruined the crops. but the church kept saying all of those things are wrong. You have to believe in the church and the saints. And then they thought, okay, well, Saint Barbara is the patron saint of crops. Maybe I've offended Saint Barbara. And so then they would devote their magical attention to the saints in a way that the church was sort of backfired on the church. They didn't like that. But they would sort of take over the world of magical power. And so people would use it for all kinds of ways that are kind of shocking to people now, I think. And half of the churchmen violently disapproved, and the other half of the churchmen were doing it themselves. So, you know, the opinion is mixed in that period.
So we're coming close to the end of time, but we do have someone asking what finally stopped most Europeans and Americans from believing in magic and witches. And before I turn it over to you, I do want to let people know that if you come to the museum and check out the new exhibit when it opens on October 23rd, you might question your assumptions that underlie that question about whether most of us have stopped believing in magic. I can't speak to the witches for everyone else, but any thoughts on that, Martha?
Our beliefs have changed. They've changed form, but in fact, 45% of the American population believes in ghosts. And I have not found anybody yet that didn't have any magical practices, even if they say they don't believe in them. Generally, when people say, we don't do anything magic in this house, and I say, what do you do if you spill salt? And they say, oh, yeah, okay, well, of course, you know. And I myself have a magical practice. When I look for a parking space on campus, I have a little magical formula, and I've actually tested it. If I do not use my magical formula, I get a parking space quickly about a third of the time. And if I do my magical formula, I get a parking space quickly about a third of the time. And yet I continue to do it. And I think that's the contradiction in modern life, is a lot of people say, well, of course they don't do that. Of course we don't believe in that. But people do continue to do magical practices. They carry lucky little things. They have their lucky sock, their lucky sports jersey. They believe in ghosts, especially if you have an old house. Everybody says, are there ghosts? You know, everybody's really excited about that. So we actually have a ton of belief in magic. It's just changed form and become kind of normalized. Astrology is basically medieval magic. Homeopathy is medieval magic, you know. So it'd be great to go to the exhibit and see more about this, because we have not abandoned belief in magic at all.
All right, so we'll do one more final plug for the exhibit. You are not currently in Eugene, but you have gotten to see all of the panels that are going to be on display. What is the thing that you are most excited about in the upcoming exhibit?
Well, I think the unicorn horn. The unicorn horn is quite a prize. And, you know, it's really tough to find a unicorn these days. They're protected now. So the fact that the museum acquired a horn is really unusual. That and the copy of the Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer for Witches, those are two really rare and fabulous things. But the whole thing is just so inventive. I think it's just really great.
Well, thanks everyone for tuning in tonight. Thank you so much, Martha, for your talk. Thank you so much for working with us to develop this exhibit. It's been a pleasure learning about magic with you for the past couple of years and being able to bring it to fruition for everyone to come and check out. So I've seen a few questions. People are wondering about the opening. Again, Friday, October 22nd, if you're a museum member. Starts that Saturday. If you're not a museum member, we'll have activities outside that relate to the exhibit. The exhibit will be open, and that opening will run for that first weekend, and then also Wednesday through Sunday of the following week as well. Because of COVID and we're trying to keep crowds down, we've extended the opening for a full week with 2 weekends bookending it. So you have plenty of time